Hello, this is the video for Monday, March 22nd. We are looking this week at Lord of the Flies, but today I'm going to take us to some poetry to just set up the text, set up the novel's themes. And so we're going to be thinking about power and imagery to lead us to setting. So you see setting here is kind of where everything is, the confluence of all of this is setting. The icebreaker is related to the content, promise. It's just, are you afraid of bees? Be honest with yourself, track in yourself how you feel when they come near. And I'll tell you why, but we're going to head into these standards this week. The first one today is about imagery. I want us to be able to identify and explain the connotations of imagery because it will help us to identify and describe setting. So we'll look at 2A and 2B, the setting standards. Back to bees. There are two poems today, and at the moral core of both of them is bugs. We are going to come back to bugs because we're reading Lord of the Flies. I'm going to read you a poem I wrote. I promise it's related in some way, but it's going to seem strange at first because it's all about the fear that we talked about with the bees, if you have fear or if you don't. So it's called Wasp. I wrote this because my friend was freaking out when I had her over, and there was a wasp on her neck, and she started running around in circles, and it was funny, and I made this as a result of that. Here's something to try now in hot July. When a wasp buzzes near you, relax. Let it do its thing. Deep breath. Count. Not because of any kumbaya nonsense, not because of reincarnation, not because you are so zen. If it comes close, you probably smell good. Don't worry, it won't take a bite out of you. It'll sniff, move on. If it lands on your arm, it's just resting. It will leave. Again, it won't eat you. That doesn't even make sense. Tell your fear about your brain. The wasp is grocery shopping. It loves sugar and protein, and you have both, wine, some cheese. Imagine, it will harvest a tiny nub of that wheel, carry it back home, feed its baby. That's what this is all about, nothing to fear. A baby wasp, cinched up, halo sleep sack, nibbling on your creamy brie. Picture that. It's just like the guy walking to 7-Eleven on your street. He also is not someone to fear. Let's not fight about this. Picture the stranger you find most uninteresting. The high-bun girl walking to Starbucks, staring at her phone. She does not know you are there. The executive ordering his ribeye and whiskey at that place you would never go. So many suits and men. He could care less about you. Think of that kid who has just learned there are popsicles in the freezer. You mean nothing to him. Not then. Look, we are all trying to find food. That's it. But this isn't some hippie BS, I swear. I'm just saying you won't get stung if you relax. Why would you confront the wasp? It will seize up and fight. Wouldn't you? Instead, when the wasp floats over, breathe. For a moment, know you are afraid. Let that go. Then give your kid his popsicle. So I sent this to my dad. And this is what he sent me back. He sent me a poem that he wrote. The other day, I was working by the fence and I had to remove some boards to get at a honeysuckle that was planning on destroying the fence. Alas, I found a wasp poem. Sting, then wasp spray. And so my dad was very much teasing me for my use of enjambment, which we looked at last week. But also he's messing with the entire conceit. Conceit means concept, central concept of the poem. And what Dad was telling me that I understand, we've had this conversation a lot, is sometimes you have to kill things. You just have to. You can't let these things go wild in your backyard. You might have a bunch of wasp poems, and that's not good. So when we found a mouse in our house, we tried to catch it with a humane mouse trap, and we did succeed, finally. But Dad was laughing at the whole thing. He thought we were being ridiculous. You know, he catches mice all the time in his house, and his experience anyway, his life experience has been to just kill them. So he thinks I'm too soft, and I think he's too hard, and it gets me thinking about power. This is going to be your timed write next week, so you'll have a timed write on Lord of the Flies. So, yeah, next week. One of the strongest human drives seems to be a desire for power. Read an essay in which you describe how a character in a novel, Lord of the Flies, struggles to free himself from the power of others or seeks to gain power over others. That'll be it. What I'm talking to you about, the wasp, the bees, this is about power too. And we're going to look at a poem that captures this far more beautifully than anything I'm seeing here. Nikki Giovanni, who teaches at Tech. If anybody is going to Virginia Tech, she's still writing, still producing her poetry, and she's still presenting it too. And this is her bio in her own words, which I love that we get that instead of the Wikipedia one. She says, I think I was lucky because I was always sniffling, colds, allergies, something or another, which meant I got to stay home from school a lot, which meant I could read the books that I wanted to read. Mommy had a wonderful library, Richard Wright, Langston Hughes, Paul Laurence Dunbar, John Hershey, but she also read trashy books that she kept in the back of her closet. I remember a nun once saying to me that Black Boy by Richard Wright was a bad book. I knew better, but I thank her for letting me know just because you are grown and a nun, you don't necessarily know what is good from a bad book. What is a good from a bad book? I guess this is a long way of saying I'm a dreamer. I love that line. That reminds me of Sandra Cisneros when she says, 11, the story, she says, she's right because she's the teacher. This is like the opposite of that, where Nikki Giovanni says, just because you're a grown and a nun doesn't mean you get to tell me what's good and bad. So Nikki Giovanni writes this poem, Allowables. It's in your packet. I've got this one and the next one in your packets, but we're going to look at them in real time, so I didn't ask you to read these for today. Nikki Giovanni writes, I killed a spider, not a murderous brown recluse, not even a black widow. And if the truth were told, this was only a small sort of papery spider who should have run when I picked up the book, but she didn't. And she scared me, and I smashed her. I don't think I'm allowed to kill something because I am frightened. I put this in your packets, but it doesn't have the space that the original does. So I wanted you to see where Giovanni put her spaces, put her stanzas, as it were, and how it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it lands on what feels like a really pathetic word, frightened. So this would be sort of sweet and sad if it were just a tale of somebody feeling more and more and more pathetic and quiet and frightened. But she killed something out of that fear. So the power in the first stanza here means death for this spider, even if she feels bad about it, even if it dwindles, though we have a really good conclusion that the speaker realizes that she shouldn't have done it. We're going to look at imagery, and there's 4 questions that help with understanding imagery. You probably intuit them, but I'm going to write them out. What image do you see? You intuit that. If I say look for imagery, that's exactly what you're doing. Which words create the image? So specifically, why are you getting that image? You have to find the words. And then what emotions does the image convey, which you'll find by evaluating the words that are chosen. Lastly, how does that intersect with the message? So a word about message. As you try to find the message of a poem, one path is through the world of concepts. What is a single concept the poem drives home? Then consider implications of that concept and try to capture the message in a sentence. So for me, if I'm thinking about concept with this poem, the word that comes to mind, the concept that comes to mind is power. And yet, it's not enough to think about power. I want to think about implications. That has me thinking about concept pairings. Power always comes with something else. In fact, every meaningful theme in literature has a partner. It's never about just one thing. In this poem, power is partnered with fear. It's the combination of things that allows us to see textures, complications. I give you a word, innocence, and it conveys a single image for you, a single idea. But if I give you a concept pair, it complicates that thought. What about innocence and power? And now you're in a world that is rich and interesting and specific. So as we seek messages, and I'm going to ask you to do that, think about concept pairings. In this case, imagery, and how that brings us to concept pairings. I wanted you to start by finding an image. I want you to start by finding an image. So here's what that looks like. This is the first image here. What does the spider look like? A small, kind of papery spider. A delicate spider, timid and quiet. I know the kind of spider she means. They're little, and they're sort of spindly, and they're light, sort of invisible sometimes, or translucent. That's what I have in my mind. And then the other image is the book, and I smashed her. And she didn't describe the book, but you know because of the smashing and the spider, it's a big book, it's heavy. Those are the images, 2 images that I see. So the emotions that brings in, fear is clear because she says I'm frightened, but also regret. The regret I'm getting from the words, I don't think I'm allowed to kill something because I'm frightened. So I'm not getting it from the images. I get them a little bit from a small but papery spider, but mostly I think I'm getting it in those last 5 lines. The message, the fear is not real, but the fear gives rise to power. So concept pairing, fear and power. Power of an awful kind. The power that comes from lashing out in fear at something innocent. We're going to do it again, but this time I will ask you to do it in your class, and if you're watching this video, you're just kind of doing it on your own. This is Maya Angelou, and her poem Kin will come up today, but also tomorrow in class. She was born Marguerite Annie Johnson, but her brother called her Maya because he would say my sister and it come out Maya. And that's important because this is a poem about her brother. Her brother was a really important influence for her, a really emotional support. And he died just about 10 years before she did. This poem suggests that he goes off to fight at some point. I don't know if he fought in the Vietnam War, but there's some suggestion that he left and that she was left to reckon with his departure because he was so important to her. Power. It's called Kin. And it's written here. That's called the epigraph. That's the words you can put at the very beginning of a work. For Bailey. Bailey is the name of her brother. So pause the screen and read this poem on your own. All right. Lots of images, and the images suggest really strong emotions. So there's the first 2 questions. What are the images? What emotions do they have? Positive or negative emotions? And then how does that connect back to the message? So here's your task, and we'll do it together in class, but you can do this on your own at home. Identify and explain the function of an image or imagery. What images do you see? Choose just one. Sidebar, you could choose the bug that I told you would appear in this poem because one does really powerfully. What words create the image? What emotions does the image convey? And then how does that intersect with the message? Consider a concept pairing. This will be your BGD. So I want you to try it a particular way because it's a craft day. We're working today on sentence variety, something that people have identified as a goal. So your task is a 3-2-1 task. Write 1 very long sentence, 1 medium sentence, and 1 very short sentence in response to the prompt. Really play with how that length can be its own kind of poem. Here's your prompt. Choose an image in the poem and connect it to the message of the poem. Use a concept pairing to describe message. So you don't have to be totally explicit about the concept pairing, but that should drive your thinking. And here's an example I wrote. The poem Allowables by Nikki Giovanni diminishes in space as the speaker finds their true voice, a voice that is tinny and afraid, and a voice that finally lands on the idea of fear. It is fear that drives the narrator to kill a creature who is innocent and quiet. Fear that drives the violence. Fear that perhaps drives all violence. So I've got fear and violence as my concept pairings there. And that's it. I will see you tomorrow.